Imagine standing face to face with two of the greatest giants in biblical history: Samson, the man whose strength seemed limitless, and Goliath, the indestructible warrior who dominated battlefields with his sheer presence. Now, here's the big question. Who was really the strongest? If you've always thought Goliath, with his towering height and impenetrable armor, had the upper hand, maybe it's time to rethink. Physical strength might be a decisive factor, but what happens when divine power, strategy, or even the unexpected come into play? This hypothetical battle promises more twists than you might think. Get ready, because today, we're diving into an epic showdown that will challenge everything you thought you knew about strength, faith, and victory. And in the end, the real question that will linger is, do you truly know what it means to be the strongest? Samson and Goliath are names that, when spoken, immediately evoke images of immense strength and power. These two giants from biblical history, though in very different ways, left their mark with impressive feats. Samson, the Israelite judge, was blessed with superhuman strength, capable of performing unimaginable feats. Goliath, the Philistine giant, became a symbol of fear and dominance on the battlefield. Their legends are not just about their physical abilities, but the impact they had on Israel's history. And when we talk about strength, it's hard not to wonder what would happen if these two titans ever came face to face. Goliath, the invincible warrior, was like a walking fortress. His mere presence on the battlefield struck fear into the hearts of Israelite soldiers. Clad in armor that resembled a wall of iron, he was known for defeating opponents with ease. Meanwhile, Samson, though a man of faith, was guided by unmatched strength that allowed him to achieve what seemed impossible. The combination of Goliath's physical power and Samson's divine strength makes this comparison irresistible. But does size really matter when the battle involves the supernatural? Samson's power didn't just come from his muscles. There was something deeper, something that transcended the physical. He wasn't a trained warrior, yet each of his victories made it clear he had a strength beyond human comprehension. Killing a lion with his bare hands or slaying 1,000 men with a donkey's jawbone. These are not the achievements of an ordinary man. And that's what makes him so intriguing. Samson was, in essence, a walking miracle. His legend grew with each new display of strength. But would his power be enough to defeat someone with Goliath's experience? While Samson is an example of pure strength driven by faith, Goliath was the opposite, the embodiment of physical power without divine influence. He relied entirely on his strength, his armor, and his skill as a warrior. For Goliath, there was no question of his ability to win. He was the unbeatable giant. This confidence made him underestimate many of his opponents. But what if he had to face a man like Samson, a man whose strength came from something greater, something Goliath might not understand? In this hypothetical clash, we see two worlds collide, faith and pure physical power. Perhaps the real question is, what truly defines strength? On one hand, Goliath intimidated with his height, weight, and armor. On the other, Samson carried a divine strength that couldn't be measured by human eyes. Both are iconic figures of their eras, and the legend of each transcends time. But what would happen if these two biblical giants crossed paths? Would Goliath's physical strength be enough to withstand Samson's divine power? That's a question that surely sparks the imagination, doesn't it? And this is where things get even more interesting. We're not just talking about two strong men, but two completely different styles of power. Each represented something greater than themselves. Goliath was the terror of armies, while Samson was the symbol of strength from above. But how does purely human strength compare to God-given power? This is where we begin to draw fascinating parallels. After all, when we put these two into perspective, we start to see that strength alone may not be the only decisive factor in a battle. Samson's strength has always been a fascinating mystery. Where did such power come from? It wasn't just physical, it was something deeper, almost spiritual. From birth, Samson was dedicated to God as a Nazirite, someone who would live a life of devotion, avoiding certain behaviors in exchange for supernatural strength. This commitment was the source of his superhuman strength, and his life was marked by moments where that strength was pushed to the limit. With his bare hands, he tore a lion apart, and on another occasion, with nothing but a donkey's jawbone, he defeated 1,000 men. These feats, as impressive as they are, reveal that Samson wasn't just a strong man. He was chosen to demonstrate God's power through him. The Nazirite vow, which included prohibitions like not cutting his hair, abstaining from wine, and avoiding contact with the dead, was the key to this unique strength. Samson followed these rules to maintain his connection with God, from whom all his power flowed. It was as if every strand of his hair carried a piece of that divine strength, and obedience to the vow was the channel that allowed that power to flow. However, like any human, he had his weaknesses, and his story is a classic example of how even the most powerful can fall if they're not careful. Samson's strength was both his blessing and his curse, as it required a level of spiritual responsibility that he couldn't always maintain. Even in moments of weakness, Samson remained a force of nature. A man who, when motivated, could achieve feats that defied human logic and understanding. Picture the scene. A solitary man facing 1,000 enemies with nothing but a donkey's jawbone and still emerging victorious. That was the essence of Samson. His strength wasn't just a physical gift. It was a reflection of his faith and commitment to something greater. When he maintained his connection with God, nothing could stop him. But as we'll see, this divine strength wasn't invincible. There's a fascinating contrast in Samson, a man with the strength of an army, yet vulnerable to his own temptations. Despite his power, he was, after all, human. His downfall began when he strayed from the vow that connected him to God. Delilah, the woman he loved, was his undoing. By revealing the secret of his strength, Samson exposed his greatest weakness. And, as expected, he paid a heavy price for that betrayal. His story reminds us that no matter how strong someone is, without discipline and obedience, even the greatest gifts can be taken away. And so, Samson, the man of divine strength, found himself powerless, imprisoned, and humiliated by his enemies. But Samson's story doesn't end with his downfall. In the final moments of his life, he rediscovered the strength he once had. Blinded and imprisoned, Samson called out to God one last time, asking for the strength to destroy his enemies. And in that final act of redemption, he brought down the Philistine temple, taking thousands of his oppressors with him. This last moment shows that Samson's true strength was never just physical, but spiritual. Even at his lowest point, he found his way back to divine power. It's curious to think how different his story might have been if Samson had stayed devoted from the beginning. And so, with his death, Samson left a legacy of strength and faith that endures to this day. His life was marked by highs and lows, moments of glory and failure, but always with a deep lesson about the power of faith and obedience. Now, when we compare this divine strength with Goliath's, a man whose strength was purely physical, we are faced with an intriguing question. Which of these strengths would prevail in a direct confrontation? Goliath was, without a doubt, an imposing figure. Standing nearly 9 feet tall and clad in armor that looked like a walking fortress, he became the terror of Israel's armies. His mere presence on the battlefield made even the bravest soldiers tremble. Goliath wasn't just big, he was a trained warrior, used to easily subduing his enemies. Every step he took seemed to make the ground shake, and his voice boomed like thunder across the hills. Goliath had complete confidence in his physical strength and the fear he instilled. For many, that fear alone was enough to guarantee his victory before he even lifted his sword. Wearing armor that covered his entire body, Goliath was nearly impenetrable. He had a bronze helmet, a heavy breastplate, and a shield so large it had to be carried by another warrior. His spear was so massive that few men could even lift it, let alone use it in combat. Goliath was, in every sense, a colossus. His power came from his military preparation, intense training, and unwavering confidence in his invulnerability. He was the kind of warrior who left no room for doubt. And for the Israelites, Goliath's presence meant that defeat was almost certain. Goliath's experience in battle made him even more feared, It wasn't just his physical strength, but his skill in using it strategically. He knew exactly how to intimidate his opponents, using his height and armor to his advantage. Goliath had won countless battles before facing David, and his confidence bordered on arrogance. He saw his opponents as small and insignificant, which constantly led him to underestimate them. But could this overconfidence be his greatest weakness? It's interesting to think about how Goliath saw himself as an unbreakable force, incapable of being defeated by any man. Yet this self-sufficiency may have been what led to his downfall. Goliath didn't just lead the Philistine armies, he was their symbol of strength. His figure dominated the battlefield, and his presence brought a sense of inevitability. It was as if the Philistines had already won before the fight even began, because who would dare face him? And here's the irony of his story. His greatest symbolic victory was also the prelude to his most humiliating defeat. When he challenged the armies of Israel, Goliath didn't expect to find someone willing to face him on equal terms. He was used to winning by fear, not by skill. Goliath's story shows us that physical strength and combat skills can create an illusion of invincibility. However, even the greatest warriors have their weaknesses. Goliath believed his armor and stature protected him from everything, but he forgot that the real battle often happens beyond the physical realm. The moment he faced David, the giant was already at a disadvantage because he underestimated his opponent's strategy and cunning. This makes us wonder, would Goliath have been so confident if he knew his opponent wouldn't fight on his terms? And now, when we imagine Goliath facing a man like Samson, the question becomes even more intriguing. Here we have two colossuses, each with a distinct source of power. Goliath, with his trained strength and battle experience, against Samson, whose strength came from his connection with God. The battle between these two would be much more than a fight of muscles. It would be a clash between military experience and divine power. Who would emerge victorious? When we think of Samson's raw strength and Goliath's refined strategy, we're led to imagine an epic battle between two completely different types of warriors. On one side, we have Samson, a man whose strength was a divine gift, allowing him to perform feats that defy human understanding. His ability to defeat enemies with simple objects, like a donkey's jawbone, speaks volumes about the nature of his power. On the other side, Goliath represented the peak of military training. He wasn't just strong, he knew how to use that strength intelligently and effectively. This difference in approach between the two raises the question, what would prevail in a battle? Raw strength or skilled strategy? Samson, as powerful as he was, sometimes lacked planning. His strength often led him to act impulsively, trusting that his supernatural power would solve any situation. In some battles, this worked perfectly, as his strength was so overwhelming that few could resist him. However, in situations that required strategic thinking, like his interactions with Delilah, Samson showed vulnerability. He was driven by emotion, and at times this put him at a disadvantage. Goliath, on the other hand, was cold and calculating. He knew exactly how to intimidate his opponents, using his height, weight, and armor as part of a larger strategy to dominate his foes. If we pit these two against each other, we can imagine a showdown where Samson's brute strength and Goliath's military experience clash in a spectacular way. Samson would certainly have the upper hand at first, with his strength allowing him to face the giant head-on. However, Goliath isn't the kind of warrior who depends solely on his physical strength. His experience had taught him how to identify his enemy's weaknesses and use the terrain and battle conditions to his advantage. While Samson might focus on using his strength to quickly take Goliath down, the giant could easily maintain his distance, using his spear and armor to wear his opponent down. The real question here isn't just who is physically stronger, but who can use their abilities more effectively. Samson had unparalleled strength, but he lacked the refinement of a trained warrior. Goliath, on the other hand, was the perfect example of an experienced combatant who knew how to maximize his advantages. A showdown between the two wouldn't just be a battle of strength, but of tactics. And this is where Goliath might have a significant advantage. his ability to predict his opponent's moves and adjust his strategy as needed. However, it's important to remember that while Goliath had the advantage of experience, Samson carried with him an element of unpredictability. His strength came from a place Goliath didn't understand: his faith and connection to God. This makes the battle even more uncertain. If Samson could tap into his divine strength at the right moment, he could quickly turn the tide. On the other hand, if Goliath could keep the battle at a controlled pace using his experience to defend and counterattack, he could wear Samson down to the point of exhaustion. The key to victory would lie in who could impose their fighting style first. And so, when we reflect on the abilities of both, we realize that this hypothetical battle would be much more complex than a simple comparison of physical strength. We're talking about a clash of two forms of power: Samson's supernatural gift against Goliath's strategic training. But would strategy alone be enough to overcome brute strength fueled by faith? What would happen if these two titans faced off on a real battlefield? Now imagine the setting where this epic battle between Samson and Goliath could take place. Would it be a vast open field, where Goliath could fully use his height and weaponry advantage? Or maybe a more confined space, where Samson's brute strength could shine? The battlefield is a crucial element in any confrontation, and here it would be no different. The terrain could dictate the pace of the fight, sometimes favoring Goliath's strategic strength and other times Samson's superhuman power. An open field would give Goliath the chance to keep Samson at a distance, while a more restricted environment would limit the giant's movements, favoring Samson's direct attacks. If the confrontation happened on rocky or mountainous terrain, for example, things could change dramatically. The mountains would offer cover and hiding places, allowing both warriors to adopt different tactics. Goliath, with his heavy armor and enormous spear, might struggle to move quickly on uneven ground. Meanwhile, Samson, more agile and without the weight of armor, could use the environment to his advantage, surprising Goliath with quick and powerful strikes. In such a scenario, Samson's brute strength would have a greater chance of prevailing, as the giant would be forced to fight in less favorable conditions. On the other hand, if the fight took place in an open, obstacle-free battlefield, Goliath would have all the advantages on his side. He could use his spear to keep Samson at bay, avoiding direct confrontations and wearing his opponent down. Additionally, his impenetrable armor would give him extra protection against Samson's attacks, which would need to find a weak spot to have any chance of victory. In such terrain, Goliath's strength combined with his strategy and weaponry might make him the favorite in the fight. But of course, Samson always had his divine strength as an unexpected trump card. However, there's one factor both warriors would have to consider: exhaustion. In a battlefield that required long distances or high energy, who would tire first? Goliath, with his heavy armor, would have to fight against the weight of his equipment, while Samson, with his brute strength, would need to pace his attacks to avoid wearing himself out before finding an opportunity to take the giant down. A challenging terrain could therefore level the playing field, turning the fight into a test of endurance as much as of strength and skill. Now, if the fight took place at night, in the darkness, things could get even more complicated. Without daylight to guide their movements, Goliath would rely on his hearing and experience to locate Samson, while the Israelite judge could use the darkness to his advantage, striking stealthily and avoiding Goliath's heavy blows. A nighttime battlefield could favor Samson, whose agility and unpredictability could shine. On the other hand, Goliath, with his tremendous strength and training, could quickly adapt to the adverse conditions, turning the darkness into an ally for his strategic attacks. In the end, the battlefield would be as decisive as the warriors themselves. Whether on rocky terrain, an open field, or even under the cover of night, every detail of the setting would influence the course of the fight. And in this context, we begin to see how the fate of these two titans could depend on something beyond their physical abilities. But what would happen if, in the middle of the fight, something even more powerful intervened? Could faith be the deciding factor in this epic confrontation? In any battle, there are unseen forces at play, and in the case of Samson and Goliath, faith would be an essential element. Samson wasn't just a strong man. His strength came directly from his devotion to God, and that connection was the true secret to his power. Throughout his life, whenever he was in tune with his Nazirite vow and his faith, Samson displayed incomparable strength. His power wasn't just physical but spiritual, as if each of his victories was a testament to God's work in his life. But would this same faith help him in a confrontation against Goliath? Samson knew that his strength came from something greater than himself. He didn't need armor or sophisticated weapons to win his battles, as he had full confidence that God was with him. This unshakable faith gave him the courage to face any adversary, no matter how strong or intimidating. And in a confrontation with Goliath, this faith would be tested once again. If Samson felt that he was at a physical or strategic disadvantage, he could, as he had in previous moments, call on divine help. After all, it was through this same faith that he brought down the Philistine temple in his final act of strength before his death. On the other hand, Goliath was the opposite of Samson in this respect. He relied solely on his physical strength and combat experience. For Goliath, faith was irrelevant. What mattered was the power he could control with his own hands. He believed that his stature and armor were more than enough to defeat any enemy. This overconfidence was perhaps his greatest weakness. While Samson sought strength from something beyond himself, Goliath relied only on what he could see and touch. In a battle between faith and physical strength, who would have the advantage? The role of faith in a battle goes beyond what the eyes can see. Samson, driven by the belief that his strength was a divine gift, had the ability to accomplish feats that Goliath, no matter how strong, could never understand. Faith didn't just give him physical strength, it also gave him a sense of purpose and determination that transcended the battlefield. Goliath, on the other hand, saw battle as a simple matter of who was physically stronger. He didn't believe in forces beyond the human, which made him blind to the unseen powers that could change the course of a battle. And what if, in the midst of the confrontation, Samson found himself in a moment of desperation where his physical strength alone wasn't enough? History shows us that in such situations, Samson always called upon divine help. That's what happened when he, blind and humiliated, asked God for the strength to bring down the Philistine temple. Could this be the moment when Samson's faith would surpass Goliath's strength? Could a simple act of devotion change the course of a battle that seemed lost? Samson's faith, driven by his obedience to the Nazirite vow, was always what set him apart from his adversaries. So, what can we expect from a battle where one man fully trusts in his faith and the other relies solely on his physical strength? Could Goliath understand the true source of Samson's power, or would faith be the key to an unexpected victory? The role of faith in this context cannot be underestimated. After all, no matter how impenetrable Goliath's armor was, it couldn't protect him from the invisible forces that Samson could call upon. But in the end, would Goliath's physical strength be enough to withstand this divine intervention? And if the battle reached its climax, what would prevail? Faith or strategy? Now we reach the climax of this hypothetical showdown between Samson and Goliath. Who would truly prevail in a battle between these two biblical giants? On one side, we have Samson's divine and unstoppable strength, which seems to know no limits. On the other, Goliath's military experience and strategy, a warrior accustomed to winning battles with his physical strength and tactical intelligence. But how would this epic fight actually end? There are several possible scenarios, and each one reveals a different facet of this battle. In one scenario, Samson could manage to bring Goliath down with his incomparable strength. Imagine a powerful blow that hits the weak spot in Goliath's armor, bringing him to the ground. Samson's strength, coming directly from his connection to God, could overcome the physical barrier represented by Goliath's impenetrable armor. In this case, it would be a victory based purely on brute strength and Samson's unshakable faith. It would be an outcome where divine power prevails over human strategy, reminding everyone that true strength lies not just in the body, but in the soul and faith. However, there's another possible scenario. Goliath, with his combat skill and superior weaponry, could use his experience to dominate the battle. He could keep Samson at a distance, using his spear to avoid direct attacks and wearing down the Israelite judge with precise strikes. Goliath, with his resistant armor, could prolong the fight until Samson's strength started to wane. In this case, Goliath's victory would be a lesson in strategy and patience, showing that brute strength isn't always the deciding factor in a battle. But what if the battle wasn't decided by strength or strategy, but by divine intervention? There's a scenario where, at a critical moment, Samson could call on God's help, just as he did when he brought down the Philistine temple. At that moment, an invisible force could act, giving Samson the power he needed to defeat Goliath in an unexpected way. It would be an outcome where the divine steps in to remind us that in battles that seem lost, faith can bring victory. Goliath, meanwhile, would have underestimated the power of faith, relying only on his armor and physical strength. Another intriguing scenario would be an unexpected victory for Goliath, not through strength or strategy, but through a mistake made by Samson. We know that Samson, in crucial moments, was driven by impulsiveness, and this may have cost him dearly. If he acted without thinking, Goliath could seize on a reckless move and land a decisive blow. It would be a victory that reminds us of the importance of discipline and strategy in any battle. In this outcome, Goliath would become the symbol of victory through planning and patience. In the end, the outcome of this battle could vary depending on many factors, from the battlefield to divine intervention. But what's clear is that this wouldn't be an ordinary fight. It would be a clash between two different kinds of power, the physical and the spiritual. And regardless of who emerged victorious, the lesson would be profound. Now, what more can we learn from this epic confrontation, and how can it inspire us to see strength in a broader sense beyond mere physical power? When we reflect on a hypothetical battle between Samson and Goliath, it's impossible not to take away some profound lessons. This fight wouldn't just be about physical strength or combat skill. It teaches us that behind every battle, there's something greater at stake. In Samson's case, his strength wasn't merely a reflection of his physical ability, but of his faith and commitment to God. This brings us to the first important lesson. True power isn't just in the body, but in spiritual connection. In our lives, we often underestimate the impact that faith and determination can have on the outcome of our own daily battles. On the other hand, Goliath shows us the value of training and preparation. He was a warrior who relied on his experience and the skills he had gained over years of combat. For him, strength and strategy were intertwined. And here's the second lesson. Preparation is essential. Just as Goliath trusted in his experience, we must also prepare for the challenges we face. Sometimes it's the well-thought-out strategy that can save us in situations where brute strength fails. This reminds us that in life, planning and patience can be as powerful as strength itself. But the battle between these two teaches us something even more important: humility in the face of circumstances. Samson, with all his strength, fell because of his own arrogance and lack of vigilance. He strayed from his devotion and paid the price for it. Goliath, in turn, was defeated because he underestimated little David, believing that no one could defeat him. The lesson here is clear. No matter how strong or prepared you are, never underestimate your opponents, and above all, never underestimate the power of unseen forces around you. Humility is a key ingredient for lasting success. Another important lesson is about the nature of true strength. Goliath represented physical strength, while Samson symbolized strength that came from a greater source. When we look at these two giants, we realize that physical strength alone is limited. No matter how strong someone is, there will always be a situation where that strength won't be enough. True strength comes from a combination of elements: faith, preparation, strategy, and most importantly, the ability to adapt. This leads us to reflect on how we can become stronger in our own lives by cultivating not just the body, but also the mind and spirit. Finally, this hypothetical battle leaves us with an important question: what really defines victory? Is it physical strength, strategy, or perhaps something beyond that? The showdown between Samson and Goliath shows us that victory can come from unexpected places. Sometimes what seems like a weakness can become the greatest strength, and what seems like an advantage can actually be a trap. The real winner is the one who understands this and can adapt their approach as the situation demands. So, as we analyze this epic battle, we can learn that physical strength, strategy, and faith are all important parts of any victory. But in the end, the biggest lesson is that none of these things work in isolation. They need to work together, in balance, to create a true winner. And now, looking at your own life, how are you balancing these forces? Have you been focusing only on physical strength or strategy and forgotten to nourish your faith? It's something to deeply reflect on. Now that you've dived deep into this epic battle between Samson and Goliath, it's time to think about the lessons this story can bring to your own life. When you face your own challenges, how are you using your strength? Are you relying only on physical strength or strategy? Or are you seeking something greater, like the faith that guided Samson? The truth is, in life, winning isn't just about muscles or skills. It's about finding the balance between preparation, belief, and intelligence. And speaking of which, are you ready to apply these lessons in your life? What can you start doing now to be stronger than you've ever been? Leave a comment letting us know which quality, strength, strategy, or faith you think is most important in a battle. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because together we're going to keep exploring these deep questions and learning more with each video. But before you go, get ready to discover the tragic end of the last prophet. You'll see how even the holiest can fall to their own weaknesses. Stay tuned for the next video. The story is surprising and will change the way you view the fate of these great men.